or potentially a time travel thing. Like, genuinely. I talk to a lot of animals. I'm really passionate about it, and very much so. They have absolutely the ability to communicate and understand when people are passing. They see a lot more of the spirit world than we do, and they have a lot less limiting beliefs around the spiritual world and psychic stuff and channeling and stuff. Hello, and welcome to Spiritual Conundrums, the series where I, a professional psychic with over 15 years of experience, both being a psychic activator, historical medium, you name it, head to Reddit and find some of the weirdest, funkiest, oddest, or most interesting spiritual conundrums that people are having, and we read them and talk about them together. And sometimes my guides chime in. Sometimes they don't. We bring them in, we let them talk if they'd like to talk. If they don't want to talk, that's not my deal. But yeah, it's a really fun series. I really love doing this. This is now my third video doing it, and I'm going to keep it going. For sure, because it's super fun, and I've been just having a blast with it. If there are stories you want me to do on this, just a quick little note, because I had a couple people ask in the last video, if there's stories on Reddit you want me to check on, or threads on Reddit, or like communities, topics, I don't know Reddit lingo, the r/places, feel free to let me know in the below, and I will go investigate them, or you can tag me in them in the YouTube video, and I will go check them out and see if there's something that I would like to include in this series. And the three stories that I have for you today are actually really interesting, and I'm really excited to dive into them. So, without further ado, let's do it. This story comes from r/psychic. It was 7 days ago, and it is titled, "I have this phenomenon of being seen in places all around the world." Hi! I have this unusual phenomenon of being seen in different parts of the world. People think they've seen me running on rooftops in Costa Rica, walking in London near the British Museum, dressed very aptly, transitioning flights in Japan, like walking between terminals and looking very businesslike, and one of my favorites, having a great conversation at a sushi restaurant in Alice Springs, Australia. Now, whilst I find this pretty amusing, I'm also curious as to why people think this. I'm quite skilled in the ancient arts of spirituality, yet this theme of being seen everywhere, over 20 times now, is starting to ask for an explanation. What are your guys' thoughts? First of all, why are there people running on rooftops in Costa Rica? It just kind of like throw that one piece out where I was like, that's a very specific funky detail.
Okay, we all go together or we go one at a time.
Here it is. Truck, 360 spin onto the palace, backflip gainer into the trash can.
Yeah, yeah.
Parkour!
Parkour!
I'm right behind you, Andy! Come on!
Do it! Yeah!
Okay, so I have a couple different schools of thoughts about what could be happening with this. This is not particularly uncommon. However, the weirdness part of this, like having people say like, hey, I think I saw you here, or were you there, or whatever, that's something that a lot of people have had happen to them. And there's a couple base level things that could be happening. One is just doppelgangers, people who look very similar to one another. I know I have a couple because the internet has told me I have a couple of them, and that's totally fine. That is a common thing. That's something that absolutely can happen. The doppelganger thing isn't necessarily a spiritual thing. It's just something that does occur. However, in tuning into that, I have notice that oftentimes energies are relatively similar when it comes to doppelgangers, and tuning into it in kind of like an astral space where I'm like, oh, okay. So if you kind of look really alike, your energies tend to be kind of similar as well, which is kind of an intriguing thing. Not necessarily exactly the same. It's just intriguing to kind of like look at that sort of energy. And even though it's like your physical human body, that's the thing that's causing the familiarity, sometimes your energy kind of reacts to that as well, which I just think is neat. It's important to note too, it is a physical body thing, which isn't necessarily an energy thing, right? If you're recognizing someone running on rooftops, you're looking at them and being like, whoa, that person's my friend. And whether or not they're your friend, like that's what you're recognizing is the physical body stuff. However, the energy does tend to match that, and that's really more often than not what makes people decide whether or not you have a doppelganger is, is their energy like your energy? Because if it is like your energy, then they have this like extra layer of like almost unknown spiritual like connection where they're like, I just don't know why, but this person reminds me of you so much. If you've been on the internet creating content for more than 10 minutes, you've had someone say that your energy or you look like somebody else on the internet. I guarantee it has happened. But to have this many things, and I wonder if it has actually been 20 times or if this person is just exaggerating. If it has been 20 times, hot shit, dude, that's a lot. Like, that's a lot. If it has not been 20 times, even if it's just been the 3 that were mentioned, like that's consistent and kind of quite a bit. The one weird thing about this whole one too is all of them have been really specific and literally all over the world. And especially the one where someone had a conversation with somebody at a sushi restaurant that they thought was the OP. That is honestly one of those things where I'm like, I feel like there's probably either a astral projection situation going on, maybe it's even like a overlap of realms type of shifting situation happening where there's like a splitting of energy going on, or potentially a time travel thing. Like, genuinely. Like, it could absolutely be one of those things. The other thing that could be happening is this person reminds them so much of another person that they're kind of overlaying the energy of this one person on top of the person that they have the memory of, which could be being used by this OP's guides to actually like encourage them to go places or encourage them to talk and have these conversations with people they need to have conversations with. And the doppelganger thing is just kind of like the doorway that gets them inside, like the doorway that the guides are using to like lead people to OP, to have the conversations that need to be had, or to have the ahas that need to be shared, or anything like that. Like, that absolutely is a possibility, which in my opinion is probably the highest option. Like, the most likely option is that their guides are being like, hey, OP is very similar to this person that you met here. You should go talk to them. They're the same person, and kind of influencing the memory of a person more than they are actually seeing the real person, right? Like, they're trying to use that as like a gateway. The guides of OP are trying to use that as a gateway to get a couple people to talk to each other and hopefully help OP down their path and maybe help the other person too. Like, there's a lot of things that have been going on there. That is most likely, in my opinion, what is happening, is the like kind of guide manipulation of energy in order to open some doorways, which is really cool. However, the fact that it has happened so many times either means, one, OP has a very consistent guide, or there could be truly like some stuff kind of shaking up, some different kind of paths diverging, or some energy shifting things like that. Basically, what I think might be happening is people who were in one timeline are now moving to a different timeline and seeing OP in two different places. One where they were running on the rooftops of Costa Rica, and then they move to a different timeline where the OP has never done that before. I think that might be what is happening. And it feels very much like, to me, if that is the case, then OP is some type of kind of anchor of the timeline spaces. What an anchor is a person that other people's timeline journeys kind of connect with and go around, basically. People like this do exist, where like the kind of their whole role here is they're perceiving everything linearly, but for other timelines, because they're incarnated here, they have a lot of weight. So oftentimes other people who are shifting timelines kind of a lot keep coming back to this one person who's very steady on their kind of like timeline journey, because they are the anchor point of the timelines. This gets into some really, really intense kind of almost quantum physics level stuff. So I'm trying to explain it in like as easy as way as possible for you, because that is the lesser likely but not impossible option. As far as like the spiritual side of it, I honestly don't know. If you want to take the idea of, you know, again, your guides like bringing these people to you through using someone who has similar energy to you to get them to like talk to you, that is a more spiritual path to take with it, where I would open the dialogue with your guides. But if that's not super aligned with you, like if that doesn't feel super right with OP, then I don't know if I would necessarily consider it a super spiritual thing, other than, hey, if people keep approaching you to this, I would start to look at some timeline stuff. See if you have memories of those times. Literally dive in and like channel about it and talk to your guides about it and see like, hey, is this me in a previous time? Like, what's going on? Do I have memories? Did I shift from that timeline to this one? Maybe I don't remember, and kind of go into that. You gotta be in a really stable mental health space though for that, like you do with anything spiritual, but especially something of this kind of magnitude. It's a lot. Like, and it's really interesting though, because it's one of those ones where I'm like, yeah, that definitely is tapping into some stuff that is not impossible, but super rare. Both options, both big options, definitely super rare. Of course, there's also the doppelganger idea. Because it's so consistent and because it's in such wild places, I doubt that's the case. Let's see what some comments are saying and see if OP has commented at all. One person says, oh, the doppelgangers. I've got one of those faces where people swear they know me. That's a little different from what you're saying, I know, and I don't have a firm answer on either one of those faces. Or maybe you're skilled in the ancient arts, like you energetically travel and experience in other places. So basically, what the person is trying to say, I think, because this person is, I don't know if the person is first language is English or what, but I think they're trying to say that like maybe the person like energetically or astral travels to some place and then other people are perceiving them and then coming back and being like, I saw you, which you would have to be a hell of an astral traveler for one, having a whole bunch of different people see you as corporeal as having a conversation with you at a restaurant. Like you would have to be such an intense astral traveler. I don't think that's the highest chance. I don't think that's most likely what's going on, but it could be. I mean, that's another idea around it for sure. OP says, perhaps it's a mixture of both. Yes, the doppelgangers thing, as you say, they lead up to cool stuff. As for travel energetics or splitting one location to another, I'm not sure if I've been told yet that I can do that. It's a bit early. It's a bit too much for this earthly mind to handle. This is a question I actually had, so I'm glad someone asked it. Someone comments saying, how do you know you've been seeing it around the world? Which, like, valid. Someone says, people FaceTiming me / messaging me and asking me directly, hey, are you here? I've just seen you doing ABC. I say no, and they say, I'm sure it was you, and they describe in detail what they think I was doing, and I send them a live photo of me, of where I am and what I'm doing, and it gets super awkward. We have a good laugh about it, yet I'm curious to know why, because it's happened over 20 times. The fact that people are literally messaging OP is wild to me. Like, can you imagine messaging? Like, I get if you see your friend in a different country, you're like, oh, that's really you, and like, you didn't say hi to me or whatever, and like messaging them, I totally understand that. But like, that you have to be really, really, really present. Someone says, you're interactive, where's Waldo? Which I think is great. It's just really, really interesting. There's a huge dialogue happening about that where people are trying to be like really clear, like, let me be super clear, like you're doing this. And yeah, I mean, I think most likely what's happening, I do think the timeline thing, and upon reading some of the comments, I do think the timeline thing is potentially an option where you're kind of like an anchor point for timelines. People are shifting timelines and seeing you like you're an activation potentially for them to switch to a different timeline. So they know you back here. They see you over there, meaning they were on this one timeline. They joined you up in that timeline. Now they're switching back to yours or switching to a different one where they can call you. This, again, gets into a lot of stuff. And if you've worked with timelines, hopefully you understand. If you haven't, don't worry about it. I think most likely the guides are using seeing the friend, seeing the OP as a way to get the friend's attention and have like conversations. That's my philosophy or my idea about it. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one though, because I think it's really interesting and I think it's something that people have experienced but have never put a lot of stake in other than just, oh, doppelgangers. I think there's more to it, and there can be more to it, especially in a situation like this. So let me know in the comments what you think it would be. Cool. Moving on. This next one dives into one of those topics that I think people really, really love. This one has a little bit of a situation around it, but it also gives kind of a space for me to talk about some of the energetics behind the situation, which I like. So this one also comes from r/psychic. It is 1 month ago, and the title is, Do Animals Know That We Are Sensitive? So, I lost my father-in-law a few years ago, and he was very close to the family dog. He had terminal cancer and died at home. On the day of his passing, everyone waited outside his bedroom, taking their turn saying a few parting words to Papa. My dog kept coming to the door, and I quietly told her to go back into the other room. Ginger, my dog, is normally very obedient, but I believe that she knew what was happening and wanted to say goodbye to Papa as well. When the door opened and a family member left the room, Ginger pushed past everyone and jumped onto the bed. Papa was in a coma at this point and was unresponsive except for an occasional vocalization. She licked his face and quietly jumped off the bed. She walked into the living room and lay down at the foot of the couch with a sad look on her face. I knew that she knew exactly what was happening. Several days after Papa had passed, Ginger and I were in the kitchen with my mother-in-law. She was reminiscing about Papa when all of a sudden his spirit was in the foyer. I could smell his cologne, could see him as clear as day in my mind's eyes on a particular portion of the floor. As I communicated to my mother-in-law what was happening, Ginger walked over to the foyer and locked eyes with the spot on the floor that I knew Papa to be standing in. She looked back and forth for several minutes between the spot where Papa's spirit stood and stared directly into my eyes. She seemed to want verification that I too was aware that Papa was present. I walked over and gave her a reassuring pat on the back. I told her Papa was saying hello and letting everyone know he was okay. That seemed to calm her, and she went back to her favorite resting spot. Since then, whenever we experience a visit from someone in the spirit world, Ginger always finds me and makes knowing eye contact that seems to inquire if I am in the know about the visitor. I always am. I know animals are supposed to be sensitive. I just didn't know that they knew we could be sensitive too. This is a couple different topics that I want to kind of dive into because I think it's really interesting. First of all, there's like the blatant like animal sensitivity. Yes, of course animals are sensitive. They're well known to be sensitive. Obviously, we've had situations most likely in our lives, or you've heard of situations where people's dogs will be like barking at nothing, and that is obviously them seeing a spirit or things along those lines. And I think this is one of those clear indicators of like, yeah, the animals can see the spirits, which they very much can. I've channeled a lot of animals. I've talked to everything from horses to iguanas to dogs to cats to bears, you name it. I've talked to a lot of animals. I'm really passionate about it, and very much so. They have absolutely the ability to communicate and understand when people are passing. They see a lot more of the spirit world than we do, and they have a lot less limiting beliefs around the spiritual world and psychic stuff and channeling and stuff as opposed to we do. To them, it's just life. However, I think what else is happening with this, which is really interesting, is yeah, animals absolutely know that we're sensitive, especially if there's like a very strong and significant trust bond between us and the animal. They start to pick up on our energy, and when we tap into stuff, when we channel into things, when we're seeing ghosts or spirits or talking to our guides or whatever, our energy changes also. We have a brainwave shift. We shift into the theta brainwave, which is the channeling brainwave. It's also the brainwave you enter right before you go to sleep. So we do shift into that brainwave, which is powerful and cool. But additionally to that, our energy shifts too. It goes away from kind of the mundane, whatever we're doing, and it changes shape, it changes color, it goes outside of us. So for animals that are particularly intuitive and particularly sensitive, they absolutely can look at our energy and be like, yo, you're doing something different. What are you perceiving? What do I perceive? That thing over there. That person doesn't smell. They just look, therefore they're a spirit person, or maybe they're a different, color or kind of sheen or image or whatever it is. And that is truly how animals do it. It's like, oh, does that person smell? No? Okay. Or if they have, an impairment of their smelling, do I hear them or whatever? Like they can do it beyond that, but that is kind of how they perceive it. So the fact that the animal is communicating like, yeah, I know you're being sensitive, I see that thing too, is really cool. I also want to just say, on like an animal communication standpoint, if you're having this level of a communication with your dog around psychic stuff that you're calling, like that you're seeing around you, like beings, people, whatever, like one, that animal is very obviously your familiar, because like hot damn, like if your animal understands this much, very obviously you're familiar, very obviously an animal connection that holds additional space for you and helps you to magnify your own personal sensitivity. So that's really cool. Also, though, I hope OP is actually talking to their dog more about stuff, because if their dog is communicating and like making eye contact about like, hey, you see the spirit in the room, I see the spirit in the room, they need to be communicating on a deeper level about everything, because that dog deeply understands OP, like deeply understands OP. The other thing I wanted to talk about on this, though, that I found really interesting, that OP says several days after Papa had passed, which they say Papa a lot in this, but several days after Papa had passed, they said that was when they saw them standing in the foyer, which makes sense. So oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes what happens with souls is basically, I do have a video on what happens after we die. Put a little thing somewhere. You click it. It'll be around on the screen, okay? You can just do a little bar. Anyway. But oftentimes when we pass, we hang out for a couple days. We stay around. We go visited spots that mean stuff to us. We go check in on our loved ones. That's oftentimes when we get, like, right after people have passed. We see them still, or they show up at the funeral, or they send a butterfly, or things like that. Like, they're very, 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 very present. That's oftentimes why we get that. Then they kind of go. They pass on, they go to what I call spiritual spa day, and they focus on like healing and overcoming and like processing through what it was to be a human, which is not comfortable for anybody. And sometimes that takes 2 days, sometimes that takes 2 years. Like it really just depends on the person and what they have to process through. And when they go and do that, they kind of go away. And so if you've ever had a past loved one, someone who passed, and you're like, oh, okay, like they were here and they're around, and then they're gone. Like I haven't heard from them in a year, and like I just feel like I'm missing their connection. Where are they? They're probably in their spiritual spa day processing still, and they get to have that time. They're a whole ass person too, even though they're on the other side. And I'm sure they still love you and care and want to be there, but they also get to have some space to navigate that in the way that's most aligned for them. Then, after they're done with their spiritual spa day, it's not actually spa day, it's just what I call it. They'll pop back through, and that's when we get people like, oh, and they finally came through in a dream again, or I felt them around, or I got their sign, or anything like that. Because you did. Because now they're able to like hang out with you again because they went through and processed what they're doing. So I love that this happened right after OP's Papa passed. Because their Papa's spirit would be really heavy and really significant. So not only is OP like tuning into that and seeing that, but also the dog is validating that. I wonder if also, just as kind of like a side thought, and this one totally popped in from Boris, who's my dragon guide. Thank you, Boris, Nux. I do really wonder if this person has been asking for validation of their psychic abilities or their mediumship abilities for a while, and now the dog is picking up on that as a way to give them validation that what they're tuning into is true. Because I just have a ping about that. Like I have a feeling that might be what's going on with OP, that truly like they're needing some of that validation, and so their familiar, who's their critter or their pupper, and their guides were like, okay, well, this is an easy way to get that validation. Like, let's send that through. It's really interesting. And animals know way more than we give them credit for. A lot of souls, sometimes we do have like one animal life, like that can absolutely happen, or a couple animal lives. A lot of souls of animals, though, like to be animals because they get to know so much more, and they're animals in all different capacities. Like, there's souls that just do the animal incarnation cycle because animals have like a very interesting intuitive energy about them. They're able to experience the world in a lot of different ways that we are unable to, and like that's some souls' preferences versus kind of back and forth, or some souls just preferences to do human stuff when they're incarnating here on Earth, not other places. I mean, probably other places that would apply too. Like in the fairy realms, like fairy animals, I bet those are the same. I actually haven't channeled on that. I'm gonna have to look at that, noting it, because that could be interesting. I don't know. Maybe some people just incarnate as fairy animals too. I don't get why they wouldn't. Anyway, some people just want to be a squirrel, okay? Some people like to be a squirrel, and that's cool, and we're going to respect that. All right, let's see if there's any comments, etc. All right, number 1 comment says, yes, they are super sensitive, especially since she knew him and she's connected to you, she can sense you. So by sensing you, it activates the awareness in her, just like when they feel your fear, when a stranger comes closer or someone you don't know just talks to you, let's say in the streets, and you're walking her, she will react to your feelings. Exactly. Reacting to your feelings is a very simple way to do that. Oh, this is great. This next comment makes me really happy. And OP comments, that makes sense. Thank you for the feedback. When I gave my husband Reiki, I felt a terrible pain in his heart. A voice said to give it to my dog. Spirit said my dog's name. When I turned to look at my dog, she was bared down and ready to take the energy. In my mind, I sent him this energy. Or he was bared down, ready to take the energy. In my mind, I sent him this energy. He received it, shook, and then laid back down. They totally know. Dogs and Reiki are a whole thing, by the way. Like, when you do energy healing, dogs and animals will really, really help with that. Sometimes they kind of act like lightning rods, where they, like, pull some of the energy with you and, like, put it directly in the ground. Because dogs are inherently, like, very, very grounded, or cats, or most animals are very, very grounded. Birds, not so much, but most animals are very, very grounded. They will ground the energy down for you very significantly. So if you ever are doing energy work on yourself, you find, like, your animals come to you and, like, hang out with you, that's why. Like, they can see that you're doing the energy work. They want to help channel it for you. It's very, very common. One of the people in my book writing program wrote a whole book about Reiki dog. And she hasn't quite published it yet, but she's getting there. And it's all about her dog's journey learning to do Reiki. Like, her dog learned to do Reiki alongside of her, and like how the two of them partnered together to do Reiki. It's really interesting and fascinating, but it's definitely something that happens, especially with energy healing animals. Like, especially when you're doing energy healing, it super duper helps. All right, 2 stories down. Hopefully you guys are hanging in there. How are you liking it so far? Are those good stories? I'm really intrigued by all of these ones this time. I was really hyped to share them with you. And I just want to say, so I have this one more story, and then I have another story that I'm going to share just to my patrons, which, by the way, it's the $15 Patreon tier. I would love for you to join and check it out. You get bonus stories from this series of YouTube, plus you get my podcast episodes a day early. It's called The Alchemist Inkwell. You can check that out below if you want to watch my podcast or listen to my podcast. You get those episodes a day early. You get additional bonus videos. You get just tons of really fun perks, my updated book reading list, and that's just at that tier. If you want to go up from tiers, I have a lot of other cooler Patreon bonuses even above that. But just on this like kind of $15 base tier, you do get this bonus story time. But if you want to like expand your psychic abilities, or have a monthly card reading from me, or have a monthly meditation from me, there's other tiers for that too. Honestly, it's a really cool community and I love doing it for all of you. It's amazing and I'm real stoked about it. Plus my patrons are my first to know about like new courses coming up or new trips that we're taking, things along those lines. That goes to my patrons. So if you're in there, you get extra bonuses from me. It's super duper fun. So the story that I am saving for my Patreon, I'm just gonna like tell you a little bit about it. It's about a person who met someone and who's that person has just kind of casually like been in contact with them, not like super good friends, but for some reason that person's energy is with the OP like the whole time. Like they see that person out of their side of their eye, the energy is super duper present, the energy is right near them, and they're like, what the heck does this mean? This is just a random woman. Like, why am I feeling this strong connection like to her energy being near me? So that's what we're going to talk about on the Patreon bonus story. So I'd love for you to go over there and get to that bonus story. Ta-da! We are doing the next story. This one also from r/psychic. I do some other Reddits too. I don't, again, what is it called? Oh my God, my brain. I do some other Reddit forums, Reddit communities. Like Reddit Pagan, Reddit Occult, Reddit Spirituality, Reddit Psychonaut. Like, there's other ones that get these stories, but the best ones recently have been on r/psychic. So, we're doing r/psychic. Anyway, r/psychic, also 1 month ago. This title is, what am I supposed to do with this information? ... I get visions of the most random things ever. Like, for example, today, I had a vision of Joe Sawyer. I had no idea who he was before my vision, but I saw in my vision the name Joe Sawyer and like an image of a soldier/policeman wearing a hat and with a gun posing. It was in black and white. I Googled, saw in my vision exactly the man. Hold on. I Googled the name and found the exact man I saw in my vision. He is an actor, or was an actor, between 1927 and 1962. From the pictures on Google, his roles were mostly military, police guy, or whatever. I don't know, I didn't dive that deep. It happens all the time. I have the most random knowledge of the most random things, like cars, dolls, etc. Things I didn't know about, but I see them in my visions, I Google them, and boom, my visions were accurate. Like I see in my visions about auto racing, and I learn about them through my visions. Google it, and boom, it's actually accurate. My mind didn't just make it up. Books, theories, ideas, balloons, houses, just really random stuff. I don't know why I get visions, nor do I know why I receive the knowledge about them. It's not something I can control either. If I want to learn, for example, a certain language, I can't. What's given to me is random. I don't know what this is. Maybe someone is messaging me telepathically, or I've tapped into the Akashic records or whatever it's called. Let me know if you have the same experiences. Cool. So this, where you are just given a vision, it seems like OP is seeing things predominantly, which is clairvoyance. Then it feels like OP is also hearing some stuff, which would be clairaudience. But the receiving the vision, the like, poof, here it is, that vision is claircognizance. That is the just knowing, here is the information. You are just being poofed this info. You just know these things. Here's some images to back it up so you know the knowledge. A couple different things I think could be happening here, and I already can tell that my guides have thoughts on this one too, so they will be contributing. Anyway, a couple different things could be happening here, and I think are happening here. The first thing that I think is most likely happening is these are psychic abilities, and I think that the belief I can't control them is a limiting one. I think this is a huge gift. I think your guides are bugging OP to be like, hey, look at this thing that you have the ability to do. This especially because not a lot of people talk about historical mediumship or historical channeling. This is ability for historical channeling. Why can't I speak? This is an ability for historical channeling, or a proclivity for historical channeling, that is incredibly powerful. And if it was a psychic ability that was more talked about, say, for example, if we went with archaeologists to sacred sites before they were about to open them up, and we had a psychic there being like, hey, this is what I feel and sense and see from this place, let's do it in an aligned way, and then channeling things in about said place to collaborate with the archaeologists. History Channel, call me, I've been pitching this forever. I think the common person would have a lot more knowledge about what historical channeling is, and therefore might be able to recognize this type of thing for them, because it does feel like they're getting a lot of information. Yes, it's about random stuff, but it also would be really useful random stuff around history and things along this nature. Now, with it being random, that doesn't necessarily mean you're stuck in this random coil. You have the ability to turn your abilities on and off. You do. You, whoever's watching, like, you have this ability to turn it on and off. It is literally something that you can choose to do. And I know that sounds silly, but the first step is to install just a switch or a knob or a button, turn it on and off. Let yourself understand, like, oh, I'm channeling in and I don't want to be channeling right now. I can turn it off. I have office hours. I'm closed for business. You can absolutely do that. OP could absolutely do that. What I also think, though, is what I would recommend doing, if this was something, if you're getting random visions about random information and you're able to validate that those visions are correct and powerful, or even if you're not, start writing them down. Like, genuinely start writing them down. Start keeping a journal, even if it's just 5 sentences about a vision you've seen, so you can go back and kind of circle back to it after you've done research to prove that. If anything, it's a really, really cool validation system, if nothing else. I think more can come from this for sure, but that's what I would do if you want to start gaining control of this type of psychic ability. Because the ability itself feels very well baked. Now it's a matter of steering it in the ways that you want to and learning how to access it at will instead of just receive the ability as it comes to you. Receiving it can be the first step, though. Like, that's okay. It doesn't need to be something that you control immediately or, you know, or at the whims of. Like, it can absolutely be something that you just receive, and that's the first go around of that, is to just receive that information. Then as you kind of validate it for yourself continually and you really acknowledge that it's happening to you, that you are channeling in on these things, it's going to make such a difference, like such a huge difference when you start to write them down and actually capture them. If OP was asking me this question in, say, like a reading, I would also recommend OP actually ask their guides, be like, hey, I recognize someone is sending these to me. Can you send me information about this thing? Or can you send me information about that thing? Or will you send me a vision about this today so I can see if this works, this whole questioning thing? I would really recommend OP actually talk to the beings around them and see if they can help with the control of a gift like this. The other thing too is I would just say, like, maybe there's a chance, and this isn't unrealistic at all, but like maybe Joe Sawyer sent you that vision of him. Like, maybe he was a ghost that was hanging out near you and like poked you, or maybe from the other side he was like poking you and sending you this vision for some other reason. Like, I think there can be more than one thing going on, but with OP, with their gift being very specifically open to like this kind of thing, I think a lot of different beings in the universe could be like sending them energy to help them understand. The other thing I would say is, like, what do you want visions of, right? Like, if you're getting these types of visions and you know they tend to be accurate, like, what do you want visions of? Do you want to see what the Library of Alexandria looked like? Like, do you want stories in history that have been told wrong or myths that have been told wrong? Do you want to learn a language? Like, what do you want these visions to be like? Because if you have this gift and this is coming to you, like, you have the ability to request what you'd like them to be about, you know? And I think that would be the other thing, is decide what you would really like to focus on, or like what you would really like the visions to be about, and really focus your energy there for like a month or two of just trying to get those types of visions. Any other visions you have, note them down. But try for a month or two to just try to get those types of visions to come through, to request them from your guides, to send it out to the universe, to like write down the visions you are having and kind of claim that in. If you're someone who wants to have these visions, if you're like, that sounds amazing, you can absolutely build up to that, but just know it will be in your own way. Like, this is OP's way, but it doesn't have to be your way. Like, you can get those visions too, and I would recommend talking to your guides and asking for those types of things in a safe, healthy, and aligned manner, because you don't want a vision that blocks out your eyeballs while you're driving and now you're seeing Joe Sawyer. Like, that's not what we want. So healthy, safe, aligned way is the way to ask for it. I'm really intrigued, and I'm really interested to see, like, obviously I don't know if OP is ever going to post again or anything, and I'll see if there's any updates on this one, but I would really love to know if this is something that they like want to keep happening, or if this is something that they really wish didn't, because they don't really say anything about like their actual desires. And if they wanted it to keep happening, I mean, I don't understand why they wouldn't just like embrace it. Let's see here. I'm going to try to see if they have posted anything additional in the comments. Oh, wow. Someone also, wow. A bunch of people are having this happen to them. Like, hot dang. Okay. We're going to do two things here. One, I'm going to read the top comment, and then I'm going to read one person's examples, because I think that this is really valuable. So OP has not commented again. I don't know if they're going to, but this is the top comment. This is normal when your psychic abilities are getting stronger. I disagree. There is no normal when your psychic abilities are getting stronger. That is different for everybody. Side the point. It's like a radio. In between the stations, there's static, and sometimes you can hear bits of music or people talking in the static. You're the radio. Your abilities are the stations, and you're navigating the static and picking up bits of information amidst the static. Sometimes something to remember and ponder over. On the radio, when you start hearing bits of the static, that means you're close to a radio station. I'd also say, like, you can also now adjust the radio station. Like, there's things you can do to kind of get to the radio. I appreciate the analogy. I do want to debunk the whole, like, it's normal. There's a bunch of different things that can happen when your psychic abilities are getting stronger. Just because you're not having this, I don't want you to think it's not normal. And if you are having this, it doesn't necessarily mean it's normal for everybody. I think that the idea of normalcy is only for us to get comfortable with what we go through in our life space. I don't necessarily think it is something that should apply to more than one person. So I appreciate the idea though, and like the static idea. Before I read this big long one, I do want to connect with my guides on this because my guides had some thoughts. The first of which is, why is this person not more excited? That was Apollo. He's like, you're literally being an oracle. Like, why are you not more excited? Which, like, fair. OP's tone is very, like, less than excited about this. And because it's random information, it reminds me of, which is one of my most random psychic abilities. I have Clair Tangency. I have most of my clairs are activated in some way or another. But when I have Clair Tangency, which is essentially when I touch something, I can get, like, random information about when I touched, like, the thing that I'm touching. And when I say random, it's not just like Joe Sawyer and getting a bunch of his life story. I mean, like, I can touch something and be like, man, the artist originally wanted to paint it blue, but instead it's dark purple. Why do I need that information? I don't. It's not valuable information, but it's information I get. And I've used that information to develop my Clair Tangency further, like, to the best of my ability. It feels like that, where sometimes you just got to be stoked you have an ability, even if it doesn't make sense to you up front. Because it can be random and you can use it in different ways and start to grow. And that was my guide's initial opinion. It's like, you don't seem nearly excited enough to have these abilities. Like, you're not trying to do anything with this. Like, there's so many other things you can do. If anything, it's a window into how OP uses energetic information. And now they just get to decide, like, what they want to channel on and try it. And it doesn't feel like OP is using that. And my guides are flustered about that one. Mostly Apollo. Again, prophecy. What a shock. Interestingly enough, too, Thoth kind of popped in on that one and was just like, oh, yeah, they're seeing stuff. Like, this is good. Like, a good thing. This is a good open window. Thoth is one of my guides, Egyptian god of writing and knowledge. He's one of my guides. Go to check out my Egyptian story time if you want to know more about him. I am still planning on doing a Thoth-specific video because he deserves his own space. But I do have a video all about my recent Egypt trip that does talk about him a little bit. He's an interesting being to have as a guide, let me tell you. Okay, so I want to read this other comment. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it because it shows some kind of good examples of different types of visions. And I will say some of the ones that they're mentioning in this are the ones that are very common. I think people oftentimes get like more premonition style visions. It scares them away from doing future sight. If you're someone who gets premonition style visions instead of just like info style visions, you don't have to keep getting them if you don't want them. Also remember, the future is very, very mutable and can change whether or not you see it. Okay, so that's my like disclaimer. All right, here we go. Commenter says, yes, it used to happen to me more often than it does now. I recall one day I was looking out of my home office window and a number of informative bits came to me. They were, A, someone in the house across the private road is going to lose a lot of money in the Madoff scandal. It was back at that time. About 10 months later, I learned a relative of the neighbors had lost around $300,000 to Madoff. Woo. B, I saw the neighbor's dog and I heard, this is Crumpet's last day in her body. The next day my neighbor came over, panicked, and told me she found her very, very, very old dog had passed. Later, the dog visited me. My neighbor told me that in retrospect. She thinks the dog had been coming over to say goodbye to me. I was one of the few humans she liked. She was very old. She was very old, and kept losing her way, bumping into the back of the car, etc. And my neighbor had to keep retrieving her and bringing her back to the house. It was very sweet that she came to say, I'm out of my body now. C. And then there's this useless information that came in at the same time. Beau Arthur is going to cross over tomorrow. And sure enough, she did. I never watched the show, barely knew who she was. Oh, B. Arthur, I think. Misspelled. Anyway, so why did that information come to me? And the first one is kind of useless too. The second one had meaning and still does. I have a little statue of this dog and it guards my back entry. I was very fond of Crumpet. That's precious. Anyway, one on the other one. On closing day, after buying my house, I was in the newly acquired house awaiting my spouse. I love accidental rhymes. Okay, in the newly acquired house awaiting my spouse. who had gone to get tools to rip out the ugly carpeting in this place. For some reason, I got the inclination to lie down by the radiators in the living room. They weren't on at the time. I started hearing conversations. They were just bits and pieces. They sounded so genuine, but I couldn't make any sense of them because I only got a little snippet or two here and there. And there's an edit meant to try to answer your question about what we do with this information. I don't think anything. It's just like a conversation you might have overheard on the subway or some other place. Everyone's like, yeah, dude, this is psychic. You're being a psychic. This is being a psychic. You're seeing energy, which I thought that was really funny. But those are more examples of those visions and things can come to you. And I don't think you ever have to do anything with anything. Like, I don't ever think you need to do something with any of the information you receive, unless your guides are like, listen, don't go there tomorrow. You're going to get squished by a car. Maybe don't go there tomorrow. But, for the most part, you don't need to do anything with any of the information you receive. You want to make sure you have spiritual consent if you were to do anything with information that you would receive that involves other people, those types of things. I don't ever think you need to. But if you want to, there's a ton of different ways to use it. Obviously, I just covered a couple. There's even more. The more creative you get with it, the more excited and curious you get about the things that are going on with your energy perception, the more you're going to perceive and understand energy, and the better it will work for you. So again, those are our 3 stories for today. I do have another one. That is the one about the person's energy constantly being next to them, even though they're just a rando and like, what's that about? So if you want to hear that story time, please go check out my Patreon. I'd love to have you over there. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this Spiritual Conundrum series. I really am into it. And yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your energy. And don't forget, you are magical as fuck. Bye-bye.